Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Allies Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. Interview time again, Stuart. How much do you know about putting on a gig?
I think like a lot of music fans, I think it'd be really easy, no problem at all. And the more I learn, the more I realise just how complicated it is.
We do know this, though, that more than 100 grassroots venues either shut or stopped putting on live music last year, which we covered in episode 1 of The Price of Music, and also that there are moves afoot in the industry to try and find some ways of supporting the remaining venues. But to help us understand more about the challenges facing local promoters at the moment, we spoke to someone who's been putting on gigs for years now and whose venue was voted Best Grassroots Venue at the Music Week Awards in 2021. Nathan Clark from the Brudenell Social Club in Leeds is our guest this week, and if you ever wanted to know what it was really like running a venue, you're about to find out. Nathan, thank you very much for making some time for us. I'm not sure if there is an average day in the life of someone who runs a venue, or whether you're always juggling different aspects of the business on an hourly basis.
Yeah, first of all, hi. I think that we also, as a venue, we do promoting shows and lots of other aspects, and it is that's part of the beauty of it is how it's different every day. You know, nothing's ever. It's not sanitized. It's not corporate. It's an ever changing kind of landscape.
Before we take a look at the economics of running a venue in 2024, can you tell us just a little about the venue itself, its history, and how your family got involved with it?
The venue was formed and started in 1913. It is a social club. It wasn't part of the CIU, the Club and Institute Union. It stayed out of all the political spheres. It's never aligned itself to anything, and that's part of the beauty of it. Essentially, when it started, it had a set of aims that was to, I think it talks about social mutual recreation for the better of arts and society. And this was formed in 1913 by a group of then wealthy businessmen, but for the local community. I think there used to be a thing called the Royal Order of Buffaloes, but if you look at it, it's around the First World War, and it was something where they were putting into local communities and seeing how they could get businessmen together in a certain space to create good for their local community. And that's where we've kind of grown from ever since and tried to stick to those principles. Then fast forward until the 80s, 90s, where my parents started to become involved with it. My father was a former committee member there when it was an old social club kind of place, and the club itself ran into some financial difficulties. And at that point, my mum and dad were running the Brudenell as like the bar managers and steward and stewardess. And they found out some financial irregularities. The former bookkeeper had shredded all the books, and there was a large amount of VAT outstanding and things like that. One of those pretty disaster periods. This was around 1990, and my father put his savings into it to kind of save the building and carry on. That's the first period, and then a lot of that was kind of a catalyst where there were the venue has always had music on. So I think that one of the things that's missing a lot of the time, if you look at the economics and where venues have changed in the last 30, 40 years, is that you've kind of had two circuits going. You had the club circuit, where you'd have an in-house organ and Leslie speaker and the drum set, and the band would come and they'd set up and they'd play with a backing band that was already there because it saved on touring circuit, right? And on that's the traditional circuit. And then you had the Ent-Sex University Union side of it, where you'd get that, and then you'd have some pubs in between. And what you found since that in the past 30 years is music venues at a grassroots level have popped up a lot more, and then the Academy Music Group and others like that have taken over from what would be the typical student union venues where the Ent-Sex had come through. So you can see that the commercialisation of the sector's got better. And when we look at this time in that late 90s, we had to adapt, and we took on a lot more DIY shows and looked at the community and did a bit of analysis on that, and decided this is where we would be best looking at to make the long-term viability of the venue, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And talking of changes, how much has running the venue evolved in the past 5 to 10 years? And if you think about the business before the COVID-19 lockdowns and then after them, what are the biggest changes?
I think you've got to use very much a business analysis now. You can't just go in to do it for the love of it. I mean, I look back when I took over, essentially, and that was on the back of my father getting ill. But I went in and I was doing a business masters at the time at Leeds University, and I used that MBA, part of that strategy, to do an analysis on the area, look at who the portfolio people were, what political, socio-economic, legislative impacts there were. And when you look at it and you go, well, the smoking ban was coming in, how can we effectively manage that through what is a major change in the licensing landscape? How can we override that and ensure that we don't lose a large amount of people that come to those venues and places to have social recreation? How can we navigate that? The same with when we looked at the area and saw that geographically we had a large portion of students on our doorstep, and we had a real catchment there. So there's a cumulative impact policy on the area because of the amount of people. So there's no more licenses given out. So when you look at it, we've got a real niche in that there isn't any direct competition on our doorstep. However, there is other aspects that you look at in the community and you go, well, there's also a large portion of the Muslim community there that don't go in and drink. So how do you also get along with them on a community value that doesn't, that sits alongside and generates kind of community cohesion? I think this is where part of our long-term vision of being a venue that still holds community at heart and part of its original roots, alongside having that business mindset to make it financially secure. When we also took it on at that point, there was a loan to the bank, and it was a very small loan, but we'd found out that because uniquely, unlike a lot of other music venues, the Brudenell owns its own freehold building and land and grounds surrounding it. So that was a major thing, and we found out that the bank had put in a planning application for 94 dwellings on the land to redevelop it, just in case the loan was defaulted. So the first things on the business were to obviously ensure that was cleared and that the stability of the business was come in there. And then you look at all other aspects about, making the links with how can we become more professional as a venue? Can we upgrade the PA and lights? Can we make sure that loading and all aspects of what you would go to do would make a great venue? So I'd often go to other venues and look at what were good parts about them, try and find the right ideas. How can we implement them? How can we financially put that in? And I think I'd looked at it in like a 10-15 year plan, and there's still things I want to do, but also try and do them with our own money without actually borrowing, because of that, not getting your fingers burnt, but finding out those aspects of where banks can be, lining up things. It made us kind of preempt that, and so we've tried to stick to that strategy and never borrow any money, and gone on to build a second venue on the space and on the land and develop it to what it is today.
I mean, one of the things we've been talking about a lot on the podcast already has been this idea of what makes a sustainable venue, what helps you keep running as a good business. And I think when I grew up going to concerts, I had a really kind of simplistic, naive view of this. Like, well, if they're putting on loads of good bands and they're selling out, it must be doing really well. It must be really successful. And the thing I'm sort of learning now is it's not quite that simple. It's more complicated than that, in terms of you can be doing all that stuff, great bands, a full venue regularly, but it can still be a challenge. There's other things going on, aren't there, financially?
More than ever before, I feel that what you're finding is the venues that are successful have other aspects to them, other facets beyond the live music space that opens for a show. So a lot of the venues that you might talk about, a basement venue or a warehouse space, anywhere that just opens for the show and then closes for that, simply is unviable. The live music side itself for the running of a venue is often now subsidized by the other facets that come with it. Us at the Brudenell have, quite, like I said, when we looked at our business and how could we tap into the audience on our doorstep, which was a large amount of students that we looked at and thought, well, they have a student loan 3 times a year, and it's a continually, every year there is a new cohort that comes through. So we are going to have a new audience to tap into, and if we can build an affinity with the audience that is there, some of those students that come, they don't just come to Leeds for 3 years and learn and go. Some of them make it their place for life, right? And if you can tap in and build that affinity and that audience, that following and that loyalty with them, they're going to become your customers for life. So we've got to treat everyone that comes in the door the same way and with the same value and try and uphold that status. And I think that that's what we looked at building, that valuable customer base. But they come into the bar in the middle as well. We've got a separate bar and games room and pool tables, and we show the football. So if you come to an event to watch a band and your team is playing that night on TV, you can go into the bar, watch the game, go into the gig, see whichever, and not miss out on anything. And I think that that's where the little bits that are added to that, but every bit of that, the economics of it, whether it is the price of the alcohol, the unit price of energy, insurance, everything has gone up at the same time. And this is where you see in a lot of venues, and almost recently closed, is that they have done, and this was probably the factor with Bath malls that we know, was that they looked at the forecast upon the next year of the position that they were in and looked at other factors such as the minimum wage rise. Everybody wants to pay the staff better, but when you're suddenly facing a rise of 30, 40, 50 and larger venues, £100,000 plus, it's like, where do you find that? As well as the beer prices going up, as well as everything else going up, the energy price. So your margin has become finer, and the financial risk, if you don't sell those tickets and you don't bring the people in the door, and disposable income is down, when you couple that on a kind of pivotal level, it only takes a bit of a tip, and the financial risk to individuals themselves are just kind of looking at it and going, I probably don't need this in my life. Why am I putting, and the everyday finite bits? It isn't just a financial risk. It's that we as an industry, certainly at the grassroots, or medium-sized level down, have become increasingly more time poor, which to people in the industry or everyone in the world, that's probably the most valuable asset, right? So when you're time poor and financially squeezed, the level of risk and reward has become negligible, and you can see that most people in the industry are just going, nah, this isn't for me. I can just go and pay £20 to a band and go and watch it in the venue down the road, right? That's often what happens when I get offered a certain band and they want an extortionate guarantee and we can't meet that. I just go, okay, then I'm going to buy a £25 ticket and go watch it in Manchester. Thanks, cheers. Because it's easier than losing £4,000 on a show, or 10,000, or 12,000, or 15,000. So there's those bits that you go, and that's the kind of aspect. At the same time, we're seeing little political will to support any subsidies or any other aspect of support, whether it would have been, we were on tender hooks on the business rates reduction for months on end. So you've probably seen, venues go, and that period, because of the political nature of where things were standing, that, the temperature at the time, And it feels like the industry has, where there are large portions of the industry, and me and Steve were at a conference yesterday, and they were part of the discussion where, when you look at the headlines in the major music publications, it is all about multinationals making more than ever, more ticket sales at a higher price, with dynamic pricing more than ever before. And I love analogies when you break it down to a really simple kind of area. And if we put the music industry, and I also want to put the music industry and bring in, because I think this has been massively missed in the live side, is bringing in the whole of it with the recorded sector. If we call it, you call it an ecosphere or whatever else, let's just call it a family, okay? And let's say that the parents of the family are the multinational promoters or corporations, and the kids are the grassroots, right? If that was a real family, you would not see your kids go starving. You would try and reinvest for the future of not only the kids, but everything they are going to bring you in future with it, right? For your pension pot or whatever else to look after you in future. And it feels like there's just this blindsidedness. Now, we understand the reality of it is that there are shareholders in those parents. They need the return for investment. But there must be some level of considerate, pragmatic and holistic approach in there to see what is the best for our family as a whole, right? And part of that, this is why I bring in the recorded side, because I think that a lot of the aspects of the recorded side, I look at this, and if we look at the current, makeup of what's doing well, last week, the last dinner party were number one. Where were they found? They were found in Brixton Windmill or someone like that. Often what you find is major record label A&Rs going to shows, asking for guest list, not even paying to get in, so not supporting the industry through their position of supposed, good standing in the industry and getting guest lists and finding their future talent from it, when it should be the other way around. They should be paying to get in, but not only that, supporting that industry and pipeline. And when I look at it in another way that we talk about, and I was hearing this on, I think, a couple of weeks ago, podcast, is you talked about major labels used to give tour support, right, to bands in the 90s, and that stopped towards the end of that. So what you found now is that major labels are starting to do the outstores, which is something that came in just pre-pandemic in the race for charts, which, as a venue like mine that hosts a number of outstores, we're really appreciative of them. It brings big artists to small venues to sell records, and we get a name through the venue that we really appreciate. However, the set is often shorter, and there's no support, so it becomes an audience that comes in and leaves. The promoter who would usually put on that show isn't involved. It goes direct via the record shop or the label. The agent isn't involved. No one in the live side is involved. So in what has now become a recorded sector is now one of actually the biggest promoters in the live sector without contributing a single thing to the live sector or to the venues. And you kind of look at it and think there is a moral responsibility there, not only for the talent pipeline, but for the bit they are impacting. So, for example, if an outstore comes into my region and there is a headline tour planned in the autumn for that, and the outstore is in May, it's certainly going to affect the ticket sales that come through there, or it's going to knock out my my show in the autumn that would have been planned in there, because the artists don't want to play there twice. So you've got this dual effect that's happening in there, and there has been little kind of negotiation about this or discussion about this, and the labels push it through, which I see this. I don't know how to say this point that there needs to be more overall holistic discussion, but there also needs to be this realization that labels are impacting on the live sector. And we all know that when a record goes well, it also boosts sales. So there is that hand-in-hand approach. So we understand the whole sphere, and it does have really great points to it and to boosting the overall tour sales at times. But when it comes to the figures involved at either a major promoter level or a major label level, there just has to be some give there to support what would be that mid to level and smaller grassroots circuit. It just needs some level of investment to stop not only the venues going, but the people who put their heart and soul and take the risk and put everything into it, because it's those people that in the venue that spot the talent, that give them the first chance, that put their own money on the table to risk in putting in new talent. And there's a whole host of unsung champions out there in grassroots music that get no recognition whatsoever for the financial outlay and risk that they put out. And it doesn't matter whether it's £100 for a new band or £200 in comparison to a £4 or £5 million Beyonce fee for a stadium of light in Sunderland. That is the risk to someone's life on the same way, and they're playing with their own money, their own skin in the game, not a shareholders. And I think that there's a level of respect that needs to go with that is not shown as much.
It's interesting because I think a lot about venues disappearing, but I had never thought so much about the people going with it. You're right. That's kind of as worrying, isn't it? As the places to play and the people who put those bands on and spot them. That's kind of it feels a bit short-sighted as well. It feels like it's storing up trouble later on for the bigger players, because this is a really important pipeline, like you said. These artists are coming through and playing these venues first.
We always talk about onstage talent. We always talk about the crews and the techs. The hidden people often are the promoters and the independent promoters. So when I look at the people who I've gone through in the last 15, 20 years of promoters with, most of those promoters now are at Live Nation, AEG, Scorpio, X, Y, and Z. And they're making, the Booker of Download. If you look at some of the people who Kilimanjaro book Ed Sheeran in the UK come from, the Sugar Mill in Stoke. If you look at all those people have come through on the same trajectory, and you go, if we don't have those places and people doing that, the person is as important. The influence is there, and the gateways that they provide, that kind of initial spark that they find. That's the thing you cannot buy. You cannot buy talent buyers like that. And if the talent buyers don't have not only the space but the opportunity to do those things, then you're missing a huge part of it. And that's why I think that promoter point of an independent has been massively missed in the conversation. And this is one of the things where we go about a subsidy or support in the grassroots or whatever else. Managers have a real responsibility here, in that they need to recognise this, and it isn't all about just the songwriter or the artist. There are those that are taking that often get the administrative burden to come up with that. So I feel that needs to be shouted about a lot as well.
I think it's interesting. So many things are changing. Obviously, I mean, I don't know. Could you put a percentage price increase on how much your bills have gone up, say, in the last 12 months or 2 years?
I mean, above budgetary increase on, let's just say, the price of beer, there's been about 3 increases in between that for wholesale costs, which come through all the myriad of reasons why a brewery would put up costs, and it isn't just simply because the Chancellor's decided so. It is the cost of unit price of energy that they cost to brew it. It's the staff cost. It's the haulage and delivery costs that have gone up. So you can understand that in the current sphere. So those kind of simple things, and this is one of the things that goes on that's really difficult that we need to address as a music industry is that it still relies, and certainly in the arts, live music is the outlier in that it relies on the sale of alcohol as its primary function to break even, to subsidize everything else. And that is a really unique position in a world where we are looking at a more health conscious society. We as a business are encouraging the opposite. So how do we secure not only the talent pipeline, but the business economics for the future about where we pay for ourselves? Do we just rely that society are going to continue going to shows and we rely on the sundry income from the bars and other supplements to prop up everything else?
Mm. Well, can I ask about artists as well? Because, and this came up yesterday, but it feels like certain artists, even aspiring artists on the way up, are playing less gigs, or if they're going on tour in the UK, say, instead of doing 15 gigs, which they might have done 5 years ago, they're doing now 5 gigs, and they're missing out certain towns or certain territories because all their price, all their costs have also gone up. So they're cutting back, and that can't help the scene either, can it?
No, and the, I think that this is where we have to look at it, and I go back to the analogy as a family, okay,
Mm.
as one unit. And I'm not just going to sit here as the venue or a promoter hat or anything else. We have to look at it from a manager's side. Why would the manager keep doing it? Why would an artist keep doing it? Why would the crew keep going out on tour if they're going to get asked to do it for less money? And there is that balance that you are seeing, and it's, I would say, predominantly with overseas acts right now on this level, where they see the benefit of coming into the UK versus other markets, and the amount of time you spend here with FEU, earning potential. And if you're going to do major markets, is it easier to come in and earn in one bit and leave, due to having the price of crew and other things that are here, or hotel rooms each night, or a sleeper bus that comes in on a carnet regulation? There's just a, a real perfect storm at times of why things have happened in that way and limited the point of what people can tour. And if you look at, and this goes back to politics and economics every time, but if you look at Brexit, hate it or like it, whichever side you sit on, the the point it was supposed to do was to bring us more agile and more competitive with our neighbouring countries. In fact, what we've done is we've held the highest level of taxation for everyone coming in, and we've maintained the highest level of cultural tax versus anyone else in Europe and overseas. And so we are now at a disadvantage to everyone else, our international competitors. So what is the UK's, or supposedly our greatest soft power output, has now become an Achilles heel to us, because we're just affecting ourselves. And it's about trying to ensure we have effective political understanding of why it means so much beyond um, beyond just the live music event that happens. I was sat with Dave Simpson from The Guardian only a couple of days ago doing an interview on exactly this, and he was sat there with a coat on with a label that said Pretty Green on it. And I said, would that label exist if it wasn't for Liam Gallagher? No. So the effect on fashion and other sides of the economy that can't be tangibly linked. So, and I keep going to other kind of things. If you look at the goth movement that wouldn't have come out of, say, you know, I look at Leeds and I go Sisters of Mercy, and then you look at the Cure and other things, how that affected fashion in a certain way that other aspects went on to make a profit of it, and certain areas of society is huge. If you look at the grunge movement, and you look at Nirvana and other things, and you say, okay, then, you know, a year later in Top Man or in Burton at the time or wherever else, there's those T-shirts there being sold. Not saying Nirvana, but the style and the fashion trends that music influences, and it's those intangible bits. So when we're talking to political or Treasury or anyone else in there, it's really hard for them when they want hard data to link those aspects to it. But there are clear synergies that happen off the back of a successful artist in the UK. And so that's why we do need to encourage them to play more markets, to aspire people, which, going back to the original thing, is why do they not play those markets? Well, you can go back to the things I said about the tax breaks or whatever else. So it feels like we need to have a movement, some kind of real dialogue about the whole family of music, and include recording that about why they can, but also politically how we can encourage certain subsidies to ensure that artists do go to those deprived communities and areas that are not playing, so you can give some aspiration and bring some political and economic uplift in those areas, so we can catalyze what we say and are supposed to take pride in our soft power of live music, and give us on us, you know, the last thing we want to do is shrink and be the poor man of live music around the world. Sorry, I've kind of gone off at various tangents, but I think they're all salient points in each other there, and are all related. And you'd have to spend about 12 days going through to dissect each point and link them up. But I hope you get the point I'm talking without talking about exact figures there.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, it's worth obviously making the point that so much of this is interrelated that, you know, it's like, but the domino, you know, that line of dominoes, it's got to start somewhere, and someone's got to push the first domino, and then everything else happens around it. And you're right, everything's sort of interrelated. Stuart, you got a question about fans, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, because we know there's a lot of people listening to this who are just music fans, but who are interested in the business, and kind of thinking, if they're listening to all this and thinking, I want to help, like I want to help the grassroots venues near me. And I think you touched on this. It's kind of awkward because you can't really say, go in and buy 5 pints of beer. That's not really a message. That's a kind of awkward message, isn't it? But what can fans do? What would be advice for you to people who are thinking, well, actually, I don't want to lose my local grass venues, so how can I help them?
I mean, you know, going in and buying 5 pints of beer, they can do that in my venue all day long. I'll take their, and whether they want the 5 pints of beer is another matter. Okay, I'll take the money all day long. Thank you. That's not me being a capitalist there. I'm very much on the opposite side. I think there's various ways. You know, I think that actually investigating and being intelligent about how the music industry works is one of the first things that the wider public can do. Understanding what a ticket is. So when you talk about, let's talk about a £10 ticket price, and you take off VAT, and then you take off the other hidden gremlin in the background of PRS, right? That leaves £6 something for everything then to be paid for out of a £10 ticket price. So it is quite staggering at that point when you kind of consider I'm actually just doing the maths at the moment on it, because it's going to just, I think, highlight what it is. So in that, £1.67 out of a £10 ticket goes into VAT. And then you've got another 35 pence that comes off into PRS. So you've got over £2 that are going straight off the headline ticket price. So the artist, the venue, the manager, the crew, everyone within that has got to take it from less than £8. And we can push up ticket prices to a point, but I think that uncovering as a wider society, understanding the nature of what goes into the finances of live music is one thing. Then, lobbying MPs and making them understand that is another side of how we can be more politically engaged as a society and push for things like tax subsidies, and then supporting the music venue, whether it is a pay it forward ticket. There are other aspects of it, whether it is when you go in and engaging with them on buying merch or any other aspects of it. I think there is a financial support, but there is a political support that you can get behind your local music venue that is as important to pushing for any kind of support mechanism that may come in future.
Can I ask you one last question? It's not really about money. It comes back to what you were saying about people just leaving the industry because it's so stressful, amongst other things, particularly as it seems people are sometimes buying tickets later. They're not buying as far in advance. And so there's always the fear that no one's going to turn up and you've got all the costs and everything else to worry about. Even given that, do you still enjoy it?
Oh, seeing people at the end of a show go home with smiles on their faces, having the experience that has made not only their day, their week, their month, or their year, and has provided some kind of mental stimulation and relief and given them the outlet to what may be an otherwise daily grind of work, is the thing that motivates you to do well. That's the thing. And, not only the audience, the artist, that you're giving them a great experience, everyone in the chain trying to treat crew and people that come through the doors well, whether it is just when they arrive saying, would you like a coffee? That, the various bits that are really simple are the things that make you build personal relationships with people and artists and everyone else that kind of go, whether that's the audience members that we see come through the door again and again. It is that bit that makes you want to do it, continue doing it, not only for any financial reward and being continual time poor, right?
Nathan Clark from the Brudenell Social Club. Honestly, it's really worth a visit, that place, if you're ever in. Are you tempted to go, Stuart, after all that?
Yeah, and buy 5 pints as well.
Five pints.
That's my
whether
promise.
you want them, whether you want them or not. I hope that gave you some insight into what goes on behind the scenes at your local venue. There's again quite a lot to take away from that, and the thing, I guess, the point which we've answered in previous episodes is that it all comes back to the promoter. Financially, everything is coming back to the promoter, and so it's a gamble. They're basically professional gamblers, live music gamblers.
I think so. And I think that the thing that hit home to me there as well was when he was talking about what we could lose as these venues go. And it's not just about the spaces for live music, it's about the people who are booking those bands, putting on those gigs and really putting their heart and soul into it. And if they go, that's a whole layer of the industry who are spotting new artists and doing that. So that was the thing that stood out for me, the idea of the importance of those people and how a lot of them are just getting so tired juggling all these different plates where the costs are going up across the board. So yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of bleak, but that's the thing that's hit home to me. It's about the people as well as the spaces.
And also the money coming out of the ticket. PRS collect money, in theory, to be paid back out to artists. So the Performing Rights Society takes some money, but also that money, that chunk of money which is coming out as VAT, Now that gives you start to understand more why the music industry and all the music industry bodies, the latest one being UK Music, who this week called for a reduction in VAT on tickets. You can see why, if a chunk of that ticket is going in tax, it doesn't leave a lot to pay the rent, pay the bands, pay the staff, pay the crew, and pay everything else that you've got to pay.
It's a tangle web. I think the other thing that came out of it, wasn't it, was the whole interconnectedness of all of this. So the fact that you've got the grassroots music venues, you've got the biggest stadiums, arenas, and promoters, and you've got the, as Nathan said, the recorded music industry who get a lot of benefit. And that idea of him describing it as a family, I think, was brilliant. The idea of this family coming together and saying, well, how do we make sure? How do we protect the kids?
Yeah.
I mean, that feels like a really positive thing to take forward, because I think there's people are talking about this more. The Music Venue Trust talks about this idea of, the bigger bits of the industry helping the small bits. And I kind of hope that's where we're going to get to, that everyone's going to get together and go, yeah, we don't want to see venues closing. Let's figure out what we can do. I'm an optimist in that regard.
Well, thank you very much for listening to our chat with Nathan Clark. If you've enjoyed the show, please do subscribe to us in your podcast app. And if you have the time, give us a review and a rating. And of course, if you have a question for us, which you'd like answered on the show, whether it's about fascinating financial stats or the workings of the music industry machine, email us at Stuart.
thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com.
Take care, everybody. Cheerio.
Cheerio.